we will start with paper on, the title is The Role of Governance in Opening Data for the Mobility as a Service in Brazil. So it will be presented by Edson Gonçalves. And this is one of the first examples of how mobility is one of these industries where this data sharing and building a governance model for sharing data and fully exploiting data is it's on the front of this exercise. So this is the prompter, and I will just display the presentation. But Edson, you can start anytime.
Good morning, all. First, I'm very happy to be here again after this strange period. As I said to Professor Matias earlier, this paper is co-authored with Joísa Dutra and Felipe Cardoso and Diogo Romero, and it's part of our research regarding urban mobility in Brazil in our center in Getúlio Vargas Foundation, a Brazilian university and think tank. And this work is related to digitalization, the core of our conference today, and about the governance role in mobility as a services in Brazil. We started with a discussion about the first experience that we have around the world with what goals, attempting to identify possible regulatory experiences that may be useful for us there in Brazil, mainly regarding the definition of mobility service providers and about the opening and protection of the data from travels. This point, opening and protection of data, probably is the point that we in Brazil, we are more advanced in comparison with the other things related here. Second, we are attempting to take to discussion in our country a customer perspective, mapping some institutional aspects and attributes that can contribute to delivery of more efficient services in Brazilian transport systems. About the methodology, we have performed first an exploratory analysis of different regulatory and implementation processes of mobility as a services around the world. In paper, we have a big table summarizing some important experiences in some cities around the world, like Madrid, Berlin, and some experiences, little experiences here in Brazil too, like the city of São Paulo, our biggest city, and some minor cities like Fortaleza, for example. We trying to explore the state of art regarding the literature and technical reports as references in open innovation and open data in Brazil and in the world. Focus more in the integration modes and business model. We'll discuss later. Probably the integration of the modes is the biggest problem for us in Brazil regarding this kind of implementation. We also performed a diagnosis of the characteristics of innovation and openness of data in different transport systems in Brazil. In fact, in 4 cities in that we have this kind of experiences. And using the literature and the experiences around the world, we start to develop a guideline for the implementation of mobility as a service in Brazil. Focus on the institutional points and regulatory aspects, and also in some legal questions. About the experiences around the world, we saw at this point that in every part of the world, we have been seeing a gradual implementation of the concept regarding transport systems. The process begins with the existence of the level planning platform, which has information about the services available, about the characteristics of the demand, and about the possibilities of routes that the consumers can use. The second step is regarding the payment interoperability. This is a problem for us there in Brazil. For example, in the city of Rio de Janeiro, where I live, too much people every day has to use, for example, 3 modes: buses, train, and subway to get their jobs. And there's no integration among the modes, and there's no payment interoperability. People have to pay for each services in a separate way, okay? In spite of some advances regarding digitalizations that we had to have, but only in a separated way. So the main challenge for us in Brazil is regarding to the first step, the construction and the expansion of a platform, and how the platform will work, how would be the best governance regarding the platform, if the platform must be provided by the government or the private sector, is the big problem for us in Brazil. About the other experience, what do you have more to bring here? The most part of experience around the world points to a gradual implementation. About the Brazilian problem, we have the questions regarding the contracts, the current contracts. There in Brazil, urban mobility services and transportation and other utility services, they work with longer run contracts between the government and the private firms. Contracts that has, for example, at least 20 years is too much time. And is a kind of pattern, a kind of standard for us in Brazil. And we have these current contracts running in mobility services, and they are old style contracts. They have no questions, no topics about digitalization and innovation in the contracts, how to deal with these things. Another barriers that we have there are concerning the absence of open innovation practices in transport systems in general. This is a sector, maybe in comparison with electricity and natural gas, and even water, that's a sector in that we are starting a big process of private participation in Brazil. Even in comparison with water and other sectors, transport systems in Brazil, they have a big lack regarding digitalization and innovation. Other challenges that we have there, that we have identified there in our research, in our beginning of the research here. As I said, less innovation in urban mobility, especially considering the public transportation modes. Big deficiencies in the integration among the modes, and a lack about the policies and the integration hubs. As I said in my example a few minutes ago, an ordinary person that lives in Rio de Janeiro, in general, must use 3 different modes with no integration among them, and having to pay a separated fee and using a separate platform to pay for the services. This is a big problem, maybe the biggest problem regarding the implementation of mobility as a services in Brazil. Regarding the quality of public transport, and we focus in this point mainly in the public transport because the the big part of the sector in Brazil, the services are provided by the government. A lack of investment in the quality, including some aspects of infrastructure and the offering and the flexibility of the services. In fact, there is no flexibility regarding the services. Things that are common for you here in Europe, for example, calculating the value of the roads and paying a fee that's connecting to the road that you choose. This thing, it doesn't exist in Brazil in general, in any city. We have a deficiency in urban mobility policies as in general, regarding, for example, rotating parking and curbing management, shared bicycle system, no integration between these things, among these things. And we have a big conflict of interest in different business models of transport operators. This is a big problem for us there in Brazil. We are not focused in this research, in this kind of problem, because it's a kind of, how can I say, political economy problem. There we have a capture regarding the government and regulators, regulatory commissions for transport operators, a capture from interest groups that have too much power and that controls the operations in our biggest cities since maybe 50 years ago. Using the literature, we described some steps for the implementation, open data and open innovation, integrating of the trips, and the business models. As I said, and we describe it with more details in the paper, the integrating of the trips maybe is the biggest problem for us. And at least is a problem that we can see some solutions. Regarding open data and open innovation, we started the discussion in other sectors. For example, our central bank started a few years ago the discussion about open data and open innovation in our banking sector. This discussion has spread for other sectors, including infrastructures there in Brazil. And we are discussing how to deal, how would be the legal and the governance framework for open data and open innovation. We have, for example, a new law regarding protection of personal data. This is a step on that we are advancing. About the integration trips, from our point of view, it is the biggest problem, and at least it's a thing that we can solve. We see that it's possible to solve. And the business model, maybe it will be the more difficult issue for us. As I said, because this kind of political economy things, problems, the capture of the state for some interest groups that do not want to change the things, that do not want to use innovation. And about the working of our contracts among the public sector and the private sector in urban mobility and transport systems. So as I said, here you have the three main issues for us in Brazil. As I have commented, business models maybe will be the biggest problem, because some regulatory things and political economy things, as I said. We are advancing in the discussion regarding open data and open innovation, mainly because the action of other initiatives from other sectors. As I said, for example, our central bank, some initiatives in the financial sector there in Brazil. And trip interrogation, have to discuss. But at least, as I said, we saw with a minor problem, a problem that we can solve in maybe in a short time. The design of the governance as well is very important for us, and is connected with the problem of business model. How will be the role, or how must be the role for each part in this new arrangement? The government, the regulators, and the private firms. And considering that the private firms that deals with urban mobility services in Brazil are not connected with technology and innovation, as I said, in comparison with other infrastructure sectors there. Even, as I said, when we compare with water and waste, we have a big laugh regarding innovation technology. And the role of the cities in general, about creating an environment for co-creation and integration of resources, and align the interests of the participants in the process. As our preliminary conclusions regarding this, our research, also the different experiences with mobility as a service around the world, present local characteristics, we have identified some convergence among them, and some good practice that we can use in Brazil. Making the concept viable for us will depend on the synergies between public policy and political and market actors. We have to solve some questions regarding the open innovation policy, and regarding the participation, the governance of the actors, including the cities, because as we discussed in the paper, the regulation for urban mobility systems in Brazil belong to the cities, to the municipalities. But the laws and the regulations about the digitalization and innovations and mobility as a service as well, they have coming from the federal regulations, from the central government. There's a conflict in this situation, have to solve. And as I said, to conclude, probably the biggest questions for us are concerning to the governance, to definitions of regarding the business models, and in the second term, the things related to the integration. And as I said, the part in that we have more advances are related to the laws and the governance of open data and open innovation, mainly because the actions from other sectors there in Brazil. Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Edson. I have several comments. I mean, the paper is clearly at a very early stage. So, you know, my comments pertain to the objective, to the literature, the reference you make, to the research design and the empirics, and then basically the issues that you should address. So I understand that you want to make recommendations to the Brazilian government about a MAAS policy, mobility as a service policy. That's the overall framework, and that's also what your institute is working on. At the same time, I'll come back to that later, you also say that Brazil being a federalist country, and at the same time, the competence on mobility is on the urban level and maybe on the state lower state level. So that's already some sort of issue that you will have to address. Now, maybe I mean, the first point is really what is the focus really, and to whom for whom are you writing? To the national policymakers, to the regional policymakers, to the local policymakers? And here comes my second point. There is a discrepancy between, which you will have to clarify, between your objective, the goal is somehow a policy that enables mobility as a service in all its components, because you have physical, digital, all that, and the literature you're referring to, which is, in my view, the wrong literature. I mean, mainly propaganda, open innovation, business models. I mean, it's sort of the literature that you get when you look at the MAAS companies that trying to promote themselves to take up these markets. And say we have to be more innovative, the traditional government organizations and are not, and things like that. So, I mean, it's not wrong, but somehow you have to clarify, you know, what is the intellectual reference on the basis of which you make policy recommendations. Okay. My third point, and there is already, even on the business model things, there are all kinds of things, more from consultant literature, because you have a slide where you have the 3 steps and all that. And I'll give you some reference later, but maturity models, you know, people, I have once had a doctoral student who now works for Mobility as a Service company. The maturity with what you start, the first step, if you want to be a MAAS provider, what are the maturity models and at which steps are the cities for implementing this? What, you know, and it starts, I'll come back to that, is with the physical integration. You point to that in your paper, you know, I mean, you can do, on the digital level, you can do fantastic things, but physically, if they are not integrated, you cannot switch. You deposit your bike here and the train leaves 3 kilometers somewhere else. You know, I mean, first you have to have a physical integration before you have it. So there are already maturity models, and consulting companies do this. I think McKinsey has done a good study on the different, and Capgemini on these different steps that you need to, maybe you want to look at that. Then I think there is a big issue, because this is a long-term, it's not just a paper. I mean, you want to, it's a long-term project. And that I have a problem with the empirical status of the cases. You refer to cases, I can't remember the cities anymore, but sort of and you maybe want to be a little bit more careful with the selection of the cities. Already there, we know every city says we have MAAS and we are modern and all that, but they are clearly in the literature. We know which ones are better examples than others. You have Helsinki. Helsinki always comes up, but you should look at Vienna. Vienna is absolutely an important case. London. You know, but my question is, what is the status of these cases? Clearly, you have not done, and you cannot do, you know, empirical research in these cities. That's what my doctoral student did, 50 interviews in Helsinki. Okay, but you can read that and then you know, you don't have to redo the same thing anymore. So what is the status of that? Are you just summarizing the experiences? And that will give you, I would suggest, that will give you a framework from which you can, with which you can describe the Brazilian experiences. Okay, so you have a Rio experience, you have a, I don't know, you have several cities in Brazil that you can describe then with a framework you already, and those would be the cases. So my question was really, what were the cases? Were those the cases, the empirical examples? Were those the cases that you get from the literature, or is it the Brazilian cases that you then describe? Somehow it's not, the empirics is not totally clear. And then you need to analyze these cases. And here you raise all these questions, but I think maybe a little bit of structure so there is clearly, and that's more the focus of this conference, there's this whole data sharing thing. And who gives which data and what, and can, okay. Then there is a second issue. It's the integration of the transport modes. Mobility as a service is not just the public transport operator in the city. It's the micro-mobility, it's the train company, it's the Ubers, it's the, and that kind of integrate, that's another step beyond simply data sharing, because you get into strategic behavior of operators and who wants to share with whom and not with who else and with what they want to share. The third big issue, you touch upon this, is this physical digital. Maybe it's another topic that, because you talk about investments that need to be done in the physical infrastructure so that mobility as a service can even take place. Yes, it's necessary, but maybe it's a little bit another topic. And then the last point, and I think that's really interesting in the case of Brazil, but probably in most of the cities, is the levels. What needs to be done at the national level? What policies you need at the national level so that at the urban level, mobility as a service can happen? And clearly the cities can never do it alone. The Finland case is very interesting, because you could not move ahead at the urban level unless some legislation was done at the national level to enable back to act at the urban. So there's always an interaction there. And that depends on the legal regime and the national culture and centralized country versus federalist countries and all that. But I think that level discussion is really key from what I know in Brazil, but in most cities that we operate. And finally, as my more a personal comment, I find your paper very Brazilian. I know it's just you, but I just come back from Turkey. I tell the same. It's just as if you can reinvent the wheel in your own country. Yes, you have specificities, things like that, but we have a European legislation. I mean, there is some inspiration to be, and I know that Brazil looks to Europe, you know, I mean, much more than the US or other countries do. So maybe get a little bit more inspired of what is, and EU also, it doesn't just talk about mobility data spaces, it has also some efforts on urban mobility and sustainable urban mobility plans and integrated urban transport, things like that. So maybe a little bit more interaction with the international. So that's my comments. Thanks.